will be an attempt, a weak attempt, to relate and convey the story of Karbala, the story of the Prophet's family, and what we know as the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, peace be upon him. The reason for me to do this recording is that I never grew up knowing the story as I should have. I only knew bits and elements. As a child, I grew up. I remember there was a time when I was in India, and when the month of Muharram came, all I knew was that we went atop the roof and we would see these processions take place. And then other times I would remember going to a specific place with my aunt, perhaps my parents or my mom. And again, it would be such a massive procession where thousands would come to the streets, and I would see, I would hear chanting, I would hear chests beating loudly, and I witnessed blood. I still remember the face of a girl that vividly seems to have imprinted into my subconscious. I remember it was not a pleasant experience. It was, I just knew it meant something, but I guess I didn't fully grasp what it was about. I still remember the chant, and that chant remains with me till now, and I'm gonna say it. It was something like this: Jism Shaheed, Jang Badar, La Bada Imruz. And with that, you would hear the smacking, or not smacking, but like the beating of the chests. Yes, so these are my earlier impressions. Later on, I think it went blank. I just remember in the month of Muharram, while growing up in Canada, it was just, I remember my mom telling me that, you know, we don't have any celebratory sort of events or feasts and stuff like that. I wouldn't be allowed to go to the movies or really hang out with my friends. But I still didn't understand the reason. I didn't really know why. And I don't remember being actually taught about it. And that itself is kind of lamentful. I don't think I knew what the significance of Muharram. I just knew it was sacred. I knew it was something important, you know, and there was a mournful sort of energy. And then we would hear stories about, you know, what others do, and perhaps, perhaps not even, maybe biased sort of retellings of what happens. And how did I come to know of this tradition was through one of my teachers. His name is Sheikh Tawheed, and he is a Sheikh of the Qadriya Sufi order, Qadriya Husseiniya order. I have a spiritual connection with him. I grew up seeing him as probably as early as grade 6. Yes, a friend of my father's initially, and then his face and his presence started, you know, populating our home. And once in a while we would have occasions where we would have him, and I still recall, some of the healings that he did, and we just knew him as a Sufi healer, guide, funny individual. And I remember him clearly telling me something around that time frame, about grade 6 or 7, where he said, you're from the Prophet's family, and it's a great honor, and we are told by the Prophet, peace be upon him, to instill the love of the Quran and Ahlul Bayt to our children. And I remember that very clearly. Perhaps it was a few years later, it probably wasn't as early as grade 7. And that stayed with me. And then after I got married, having children, I didn't want to impart religion in a doctrinal sort of fashion, where, you're just told what to believe. I wanted emotion to be a part of the tradition, so that there's an actual connection with the heart and personalities. There's a connection to worship, because you know what it feels like, and you're not really you're not doing anything out of fear, and you're not acting upon an outside source, basically providing these sort of do's and don'ts and outlines. I didn't want to create that sort of byproduct where you have these children who are just basically have just been brainwashed to do certain things, and then they were told that if they don't, then fear would be a means to have these same children act and do, and rather than love, rather than a longing, rather than something very genuine and sincere, just because you want to. So that particular hadith that was narrated by Sheikh Tawheed, that kept ringing in my ears, and I went on a full-out search trying to figure out, like, how do you teach the tradition of loving the Ahlul Bayt? How come I don't even know that? Like, I don't even know anything about it, and I'm supposedly in a lineage that is supposed to know something. So anyhow, I had reached out to him in an email, perhaps because I had already moved to Saudi. Yes, I think so. And so I reached out to him and asked him, how do I go about, putting this into practice? So he said, he referred to this book. Oh no, it's not here, sorry. Anyways, it's Ismail Nabahani's I think it's called The Excellence and Virtues of the Ahlul Bayt. No, it isn't. I will give the reference later for what that book is, but it's basically about the love of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the importance of that love. So I went about and I was trying to decode it, understand it, and just seek it. That further led to a lot more in-depth sort of research on, how to impart, I guess, how does one impart spirituality to children? I don't think there's any way but to just embody and do and just be that. So that meant, going from theory to actual practice, and if that meant, creating certain environments and in a culture where spirituality would flourish in your home naturally, just like you would breathe air, then that's what I had to work on. So, and I guess I'm still working on it. But that's basically how I was led to this. And then I believe, I came across, the teachings and who these personalities were and what happened with them and why are they important and what is the importance of the Ahlul Bayt in connection to Islam, in connection to the Prophet, peace be upon him. Why is this not emphasized enough? So I went into that sort of questioning, and I wanted to know, like, how come? I never really heard it in the mosques. All I knew was the do's and don'ts, and what happens when you don't do certain things, and just random lectures, but there was never any real emphasis on this. And then whenever there was, and if you tried to seek that out, you would have to really you wouldn't really find it, and it wasn't a common thing, at least while I was growing up and experiencing Islam in society. That led me to more of an inward sort of journey of why am I seeking it outside? Why am I depending on scholars and people to tell me this stuff is within me, and this is stuff that maybe I need to seek and learn myself? And so and the answers are within. So as I was seeking, I was getting certain answers. The blessings of initiation are tremendous. So one of my guides, I remember, he mentioned to me, and he said, the children should be taught, what happens, or what happened, in Muharram, what happened in these 10 days, and what happened to the family of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So then I made it a point that I am going to revive that what was forgotten and left behind in our own family. I mean, considering my father's mother, my paternal grandmother came from Shia background, and this was a practice in her home and in her family, and but it was not carried on within her children and her family, and my dad never really passed it on to me in the sort of he did, actually. I shouldn't say he didn't. I believe everything was taught to me without the customs and all the fancy sort of things. It was something that I was actually, the way of being, like how my parents were, is probably how I picked it up, but nothing on a doctrinal basis of this is how it's done, and these are the practices, this is the tradition. I didn't have that growing up. We were not raised that way. Later on, yes, these things started to re-enter with that awareness. And so I made it a point that I am going to revive this back into my family and make sure that I educate my kids on the family that runs in their bloodline, and also the Prophet's family, irrespective. Why are they important? Why is it that the Quran asks us, not the Quran, but Allah Almighty asks us to love the family of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And why is there this emphasis? And basically the why. So basically what I started to do was I didn't want any heavy duty sort of texts, and I needed something simple easy and that would be digestible for children. So I've been using this one, which I found on my father's shelf, and I took it. And I've been using this, and it's just something I do every year, where basically it goes into a little bit of an intro. Then from there, it goes into almost like a paragraph per day, starting from day 1 of Muharram all the way to day 10. And then, we would go into the lessons and what, extract the lessons and what that, what Karbala means, to oneself. So that's how I was doing it in terms of tradition. There was no sort of support system where I was living. There was no sort of gatherings, no scholars, none of that. So I had to create that culture at home. And you couldn't, being where I am in Saudi Arabia, you couldn't really, let's say, invite people to your home and have large gatherings. And I really didn't know anybody who was interested. So for those who may be wondering, like, oh, it's easy to say, but if you have a support system or a community, none of that was with me. Even just, having to, as a seeker on the Sufi path, basically that was never there either, any support system. So you can create that and you can do that yourself. So it was a challenge upon myself to create it within my home, not manufacture it, but just imbibe that sort of energy, but also make a conscious effort to remember Hussein, to remember Fatima, to remember Ali, to remember Hassan, to remember Zainab, who came later in remembrance, to remember all these blessed personalities, and understand. I still don't understand, but try to understand, who they are, and with that sort of seeking and understanding, a love would hopefully be instilled within the hearts of participants of the gathering, and then that would be infused in the day-to-day, in the way of being, in the remembrance, without an effort as such as we take in oxygen, something that should be effortless. So an establishment of a culture was necessary. And with that came poetry. Poetry became my guiding light, my way of sort of expressing probably what I was absorbing, because you really don't know what you are absorbing, and it has to manifest in some way or another. So how it was manifesting in me, in whatever way there was any level of absorption, was through poetry. So a very natural sort of outpouring would come, and I would have these sort of pennings, and then I would share it later as the kids grew up with them, and with seekers, and that led to something that went beyond the home, to attracting seekers who were seeking this sort of information, whether they came from the Prophet's family or whether they were seeking to learn more, whether they were unaware all their life and now they wanted to know. So whatever the case was, and so we now a culture was being created within a community where seekers would be able to gather in that remembrance. So we had over the years gatherings of remembrance during Muharram, and whether it was at my place or at another person's place, it was done. And we would have a communal meal afterwards, and sometimes a discussion, and the reading and poetry and all that would happen during the event. Yes, and that's how we did it, and that's how it's done, and that's how I've been doing it. So now what motivates me to basically put this video out, or these series of videos out, is basically I have my nieces and nephews who are young, and they're so gifted and special and talented, and they mean so much to me. So I didn't want to have that repetition and that kind of struggle, because if it's not always easy to focus sort of that energy during this time, depending on the environments, to actually impart these sort of teachings. And I thought, let me take it upon myself to rewind and go back to my initial experience, and be able to relate the story of Imam Hussein and his companions to these young, beautiful hearts. Also, there are other seekers who want to know, and they may not be interested in perhaps listening to heavy lectures that can go on for 30 minutes or an hour, or would be very intense. People who are looking for simple doses of the story without just simply relate, and that's it. I wish I could learn the tradition of narrating it, because that is an art itself. I pray that I am granted such an opening where I could recite the Maqtal and the incident of Karbala poetically, as it has been done so for centuries. And I hope I find a teacher who would be able to teach me that. And for all those who are seeking to learn more, may that open up. So I conclude this session with basically just saying that I will have 10 separate episodes covering day 1 to day 10, Ashura, and they will be able to watch them in a very short time. So to basically just know what happened, and that's it. The journey beyond that is not, that's a personal journey, and the openings are personal, and that's it. So what I did, I'm going to just repeat that, and I look forward to the following episodes.